The HOA banned us from parking in our own driveway. Big mistake. My dad was the banker reviewing their $1 million loan. I saw it before I felt it, the punch in the gut. A bright pink slip flapping under my windshield wiper like a flag announcing trouble. Saturday sun warming the pavement, birds somewhere in the elm trees, coffee still warm in my hand, and that ridiculous splash of color screaming at me from our driveway. I didn't touch it right away. I just stood there, listening to the little tick of the cooling engine and the far-off hum of a lawnmower 2 blocks over. Our cul-de-sac was the kind of place where kids drew hopscotch on the sidewalk, and Mr. Jackson waved at everyone whether he knew you or not. Not the kind of place where you'd expect to get fined for parking in your own driveway. Finally, I lifted the wiper. Driveway violation, $150 fine. Large block letters, printed so square you could level a picture frame by them. Below, a neat citation. Section 7.3 of Pinecrest Gardens rules. No more than 2 vehicles in a driveway at any time. Violation documented 6:12 a.m. Photographs on file. My stomach dropped. 2 vehicles? Last night had been Emily's graduation party. Burgers on the grill, lemon bars, Aunt Linda's potato salad that always disappeared first. People hugged, laughed, and left as the string lights swayed in the warm breeze. A few relatives stayed late and left their cars in our driveway. Nobody parked on the street. Nobody blocked a hydrant. It was our driveway. I carried the slip inside like it might stain the walls if I held it wrong. Mom, Laura, was still in her robe at the kitchen island, hair in a loose knot, reading glasses perched low. She saw my face and reached for the paper. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "Our own driveway?" Dad, Thomas Reynolds, looked up from his coffee and the morning paper. He has the steady eyes of a man who's spent 30 years reading numbers for a living, which he has. Senior loan officer at First National Bank, shirt's always crisp, calm, even when the world isn't. He took the slip, scanned it, and his forehead folded into careful lines. Section 7.3, he said softly, more than 2 vehicles. That's creative. It's petty, Mom said. I've practiced real estate law in 3 counties, and I've never seen anyone enforce something like this after a party. Dad tapped the number at the bottom, the HOA office line. "Let's ask," he said, as if asking would fix the world. He put the phone on speaker. It rang twice. A woman answered, clipped and bright, the sort of voice that smiles with its teeth. "Pinecrest Gardens, HOA, this is Karen Mitchell." "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," Dad said. "Thomas Reynolds, 428 Meadowlark Court. We received a citation this morning." "No mistake," she said before he finished. "You had 5 cars in your driveway. Section 7.3 allows only 2. The fine is $150, due in 10 days. Thank you for your cooperation." Dad's knuckles went white around the phone. "It was my daughter's graduation," he said, still courteous. "Overnight guests, no street parking. Surely there is an exception for special events." "Rules are rules, Mr. Reynolds," Karen said. "If everyone did as they pleased, our neighborhood would look like a used car lot." Mom leaned in. "We're happy to appeal," she said. "What is the process?" "You may bring your appeal to the next board meeting," Karen said, crisp as cellophane. "But I should inform you, I personally documented the violation. The evidence is quite clear." The line clicked. No goodbye. We stood there with the beep-beep of the disconnected call hanging in the air. I went to the front window and eased a slat of the blinds with my finger. Across the street, a woman with perfect blonde hair stood in her driveway with a phone to her ear, angled toward our house like a sundial pointing due east. Athletic wear, expensive shoes, posture like a ruler. She was still talking when her eyes met mine. "Is that her?" I asked. Dad joined me at the window. He didn't need to say yes. He just watched. "New president," he said finally. "Elected last month." Mom exhaled, long and slow. "I've seen this movie." We pulled the HOA handbook from the kitchen drawer, where we keep batteries and takeout menus. 50 pages of rules for things adults should be able to figure out. The parking section was exactly where you'd expect it not to be, page 37, after pet leash lengths and acceptable mailbox finishes. There it was, section 7.3, 2 vehicles in the driveway, period. No mention of guests, no exceptions for graduations, holidays, or common sense. Dad read the paragraph twice, then set the book down as if it might bite. Well, he said, they do have the rule. The question is, why enforce it this way? Because power is a habit, Mom said, and she's practicing. I went outside to collect red plastic cups from under the hydrangeas. The yard still smelled faintly of charcoal and dill. Our string lights sagged a little, lazy in the morning heat. Across the street, Karen finished her call and snapped a photo of our mailbox from 3 different angles, like it had committed a crime. By afternoon, the neighborhood rumor mill had done its work. Mr. Jackson strolled over with his hands in his pockets and his eyebrows up in apology. He has that kind of face, always looks sorry for something even when he's not. "Alex," he said, nodding toward the house. "Your folks home?" He told us about the basketball hoop they made his son take down after 5 years without complaint, about the Garcias getting cited for the wrong color marigolds, about Mrs. Wilson being warned for a bird feeder 2 inches too tall. "It's like she's got a tape measure in one hand and a bullhorn in the other," he said. "Folks don't know whether to mow their lawns or move." Mom took notes, the lawyer in her awake now. Dad listened, quiet. The banker in him doing what bankers do, placing numbers in columns only he could see. "Pay the fine?" I asked when Mr. Jackson left. It tasted bad in my mouth, giving in, saying please to a bully. "Not yet," Dad said. "Let's learn the terrain first." We ate leftover burgers at the island that night, the 4 of us bumping elbows and trying not to say what we were all thinking, that we'd been singled out because it was easy. The dishes were barely stacked when the doorbell rang. Another pink slip. Different offense. Improper lawn maintenance. Grass exceeds 3.5 inches. Fine $75. Issued that afternoon. "I cut the grass 4 days ago," Dad said, looking out at a lawn that could have been in a catalog. I checked the window again. Karen stood under the streetlight with a tape measure, bending to measure the edge of our yard, while Diane Harper, her friend from 2 doors down, held up a phone like a tiny flashlight. Mom rubbed her temples. "Okay," she said softly. "This isn't about grass." Dad put the new citation beside the first, lined them up like puzzle pieces. He didn't raise his voice. He never does. But something settled in him, the careful way a safe clicks shut. "Then we won't treat it like grass," he said. "We'll treat it like what it is." "What is it?" I asked. "A test," he said. He looked at the pink slips again. "And a pattern." Outside, the tape measure snapped back into its case. Across the street, Karen smiled at nothing at all, then turned and walked away, heels silent on the new concrete she'd insisted the association pour last month. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was how fast a $150 fine could turn into something much bigger. How a bright pink slip could peel up a corner of our neighborhood and show what was underneath. How a rule buried on page 37 could tilt an entire summer. But that would come later. For now, it was just the color of the paper and the feeling in my gut, and my dad placing 2 citations on the counter like starting pieces on a long, complicated board. The next few days felt like living under a slow drip of bad news. Monday morning, another bright slip waited on the mailbox. Unapproved garden ornament, 50 fine. It was the little ceramic gnome Emily had painted in 3rd grade. Blue hat, crooked smile, leaning slightly forward like he was listening for gossip. He'd been tucked by the hydrangeas for years. Dad read the citation twice, then looked out the window. "She's cataloging our property," he said. Tuesday brought a new offense. Wind chimes exceed acceptable noise levels. 60 fine. That would be Mom's wind chimes. The copper and glass set her sister gave her last Christmas. They made a soft tinkling sound when the breeze moved through, no louder than the rustle of our maple leaves. On Wednesday, the slip was yellow instead of pink. Improper hose storage, 40 fine. The garden hose was coiled neatly on its reel, just not behind a fence. Section 5.4b apparently required hoses to be stored out of sight from the street. By Thursday evening, 5 separate citations were spread across the kitchen counter like playing cards in a losing hand. Grass height, gnome, wind chimes, hose, mailbox color. Apparently, the black we'd chosen was a non-compliant shade. Total fine so far, $425. Mom put both hands flat on the table. This is targeted harassment. She's not enforcing the rules. She's enforcing them on us. I leaned against the counter, watching Dad thumb through the slips in order, his eyes distant, methodical. Patterns tell you more than incidents, he said finally. One violation might be coincidence. 5 in 5 days? That's a strategy. After dinner, we heard the knock. 3 quick raps, the sound of urgency. I opened the door then to find Mrs. Smith from 3 houses down. She clutched a pink slip of her own, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "Is your father home?" she asked. 5 minutes later, our living room was full. The Garcias came, Mr. Jackson returned, Mrs. Wilson with her cane, and her slow, careful steps, even Dr. Patel, who rarely left his corner lot. Each of them had their own story, their own paper slips. "She fined me for having a package on my porch," Dr. Patel said, voice tight. "It was a medical equipment delivery. I was in surgery that afternoon. She told me my bird feeders were unsightly and attracted vermin," Mrs. Wilson said, dabbing at her eyes. "Those birds are my company most days. She made my husband repaint the shutters because she said the color was too cheerful," Mrs. Garcia added. Dad listened without interrupting, jotting notes in his banker's handwriting, small, precise. When the last story was told, he turned his laptop around to face the group. "Last year, before Karen took over," he said, "the HOA collected about $5,000 in fines for the whole year. In the last 2 months alone, they've collected over $122,000. And there's something else. The HOA bylaws say all fine money must go to community improvements. But according to these statements, there's no record of those funds in the official accounts." The room went still. "Where's it going?" Mr. Jackson asked. "That's what I plan to find out," Dad said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, like he'd already started the math in his head. Mrs. Smith looked worried. "Won't she know you're investigating? Banking regulations require confidentiality," Dad said. "She'll know the bank is looking into things, but not that I'm the one holding the file." I glanced toward the window. Across the street, Karen was out again, tape measure in hand, Diane trailing behind with her phone. They were measuring the curb this time, pausing to take photos every few feet. "She's relentless," Mom said. Dad didn't look up from his notes. "So am I." That night, I lay awake in the blue light from my phone, scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had posted a long rant about certain families disregarding community standards and undermining property values. She didn't name us, but she didn't have to. In the comments, I saw people chiming in with rules are rules, and some folks think they're above the law. But I also saw neighbors defending us, asking why enforcement had suddenly become so aggressive. Somewhere between the arguments and the emojis, I realized the battle lines were forming, and the next move, that would be ours. Friday morning, Dad lingered over his second cup of coffee longer than usual. He had that faraway look, the one where you can see him running numbers in his head like beads on an abacus no one else can see. I was rinsing my cereal bowl when he said it. "They're applying for a loan," I turned. "Who is?" "The HOA. He didn't smile, but his voice had a thread of something. Satisfaction, maybe. $1.2 million. Renovations for the community center. Big project. They wanted approved before winter. Mom closed the dishwasher. "And let me guess, they applied through First National." Dad nodded. "The file landed on my desk this week." I blinked at him. "Wait, you're the one reviewing their loan?" "That's right." For a second, the kitchen felt like it had tilted. The idea of Karen Mitchell's neatly manicured hands resting on paperwork that my dad would be flipping through, line by line, clause by clause, was almost too good to process. "Does she know?" Mom asked. "Not yet. And by law, she won't. Confidentiality works both ways. She'll know the bank is asking for documents, but she won't know who's reading them." I set my bowl down slowly. "So, you can see all their financials?" Dad gave me a look over the rim of his mug. "I can see everything they have provided, and if I spot discrepancies, I can request an audit. Standard procedure for a loan this size." Mom raised an eyebrow. "And if the audit doesn't match the loan application?" "Then the loan gets delayed or denied, depending on what's uncovered." A slow smile crept across my face. "She has no idea." Dad shook his head. "Not a clue." The rest of the day, the tension in our house shifted. We still had citations lined up like trophies of harassment, 425 or worth. But now there was something else under the surface. A quiet current running beneath the noise. That afternoon, I caught Karen pacing along our property line with Diane, pointing at our lawn like it had personally offended her. Diane kept snapping pictures, pausing to zoom in. They didn't see me watching from the upstairs window. "Let her measure every blade of grass she wants," Dad said when I told him. "The bank's going to measure something else entirely." After dinner, I found him in his home office, papers spread across the desk in neat stacks. Some were bank documents, others HOA financial statements he'd downloaded from the member portal. He was cross-referencing figures with the focus of a man assembling a puzzle where half the pieces don't fit. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Inconsistencies," he said without looking up. "Income that doesn't match deposits, expenses without receipts, patterns. Patterns like the ones with the fines?" "Exactly." The desk lamp cast a warm halo over the papers, catching the silver in his hair. He tapped a line item with his pen. "See this? They reported $300 in fine revenue last quarter. Between just us, the Smiths, and the Garcias, I can account for nearly half that amount, which means either everyone else in this neighborhood is a saint or someone isn't reporting all the fines." I leaned against the doorway, watching him work. For the first time since the pink slip appeared, I felt a flicker of something like hope. If this was a chessboard, Karen thought she was moving pawns. She had no idea my dad had just put a hand on the queen. By Saturday afternoon, the pink and yellow slips had become part of the scenery in our kitchen, fanned out on the counter like a bad hand of cards no one wanted to play. Mom had started keeping them in a neat stack, almost like evidence in a trial she was quietly building in her head. The doorbell rang just as Dad was coming in from mowing the lawn, again, just to make sure no blade of grass gave Karen an excuse. I opened the door to find Mr. Jackson standing there, his hands in his pockets, the brim of his ball cap low against the sun. "Alex," he said, "mind if I come in for a minute?" He stepped inside, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came Mrs. Smith, still clutching the citation she'd shown us earlier in the week. Then the Garcias, arm in arm. Then Mrs. Wilson with her cane. Then Dr. Patel, still in his navy scrubs from the hospital. They filled our living room in that quiet, uneasy way people do when they've all been burned by the same fire. Mrs. Smith spoke first. "We thought maybe, if we got together, we could figure out what to do." Dad looked around the room, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "All right," he said. "Let's start with what you've each been dealing with." And one by one they told their stories. Mr. Jackson's voice had an edge when he described being ordered to take down the basketball hoop in his driveway after 5 years without complaint. Said it was a safety hazard, same one my son's been shooting at since middle school. The Garcias had been cited for unapproved landscaping when Maria planted marigolds along the walk. "Wrong color," she said, shaking her head. "Can you imagine? Too bright for her taste." Mrs. Wilson's voice wavered. "My bird feeders. She said they attract vermin. Those birds are the only company I have most afternoons." Dr. Patel crossed his arms. "I had a package delivered. Medical equipment. It was on my porch for 4 hours while I was in surgery. She wrote me up for unsightly clutter." Mom listened, jotting notes on a legal pad. Every so often she'd underline something, her pen pressing hard enough to dent the page. When they were finished, Dad stood. "What you're describing isn't normal rule enforcement. It's selective, and in some cases, it's not even consistent with the bylaws." Mr. Jackson nodded. "Feels like she's got it in for certain people." "It's more than that," Dad said. "Last year, before Karen took over, the HOA collected around $5,000 in fines total. In the last 2 months, it's over $122,000. And according to the financial statements, none of that recent money appears in the official accounts." A murmur ran through the room. "Where's it going?" Mrs. Garcia asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Dad said. His tone was calm but carried weight, like each word was measured. Mrs. Smith looked uneasy. "If she figures out you're the one looking into this—" "She won't," Dad said. "Bank confidentiality. She'll know the bank is reviewing the loan application. She won't know I'm holding the file." For a moment, the room was quiet, everyone processing that this wasn't just about gnomes and grass height anymore. It was about money, big money, and a paper trail that might not exist. Then Mr. Jackson leaned forward. "So, what's the plan?" Mom glanced at Dad, then back to the group. We start documenting everything: dates, times, photos, any violation notices, any unusual activity, and we keep copies outside of our homes in case things get misplaced. Dr. Patel frowned. Misplaced? Dad's voice was steady. If someone's willing to bend rules to collect money, they might be willing to make inconvenient records disappear. We spent the next half hour trading phone numbers, setting up a shared email account, agreeing on how to label files. It felt strange, this quiet little resistance forming in our living room. Like we'd all been living in the same place for years, but only now realized we were neighbors in more than name. As people were leaving, Mrs. Wilson paused by the door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving us a place to start." Dad just nodded. "We'll take it one step at a time." After the last car pulled away, I stood at the window, watching taillights fade into the dusk. Across the street, Karen's porch light flicked on. A shadow moved past her window, tall, deliberate. I couldn't tell if she was looking out, but the hair prickled on the back of my neck. Mom gathered the legal pad. Dad stacked the citations. It all felt more real now, like we'd crossed an invisible line. And somewhere deep down, I knew Karen would feel it too. The community center's meeting room was usually a sleepy place. Half a dozen folding chairs, a coffee pot that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration, and Karen presiding over an agenda no one cared about. Not that night. When we walked in, every chair was taken. People stood along the walls, others leaned against the doorframe. You could feel the murmur in the air, a kind of restless energy. Even the coffee pot had been scrubbed clean. Karen sat at the head table in her fitted blazer and pastel scarf, tapping a pen against the agenda like a metronome. Diane was to her right, eyes flicking between the crowd and her phone. The rest of the board members shuffled papers, studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone. Dad took a seat halfway back, legal pad on his lap. Mom sat next to him, phone ready to record. I found a spot along the wall where I could see everything. Karen opened the meeting with her usual clipped cheer. "Thank you all for attending. Let's get started." She moved briskly through landscaping updates and pool maintenance, pausing only to smile at her allies in the front row. Then she reached the renovation item. "The community center loan application is proceeding as expected. We anticipate—" "Excuse me?" Dad's voice was calm but carried across the room. Karen froze, the pen still in her hand. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds?" "As a community member," Dad said, "I'd like more details about this loan." Karen's smile tightened. "The details are confidential." "Actually," Dad replied, "since this loan will use our collective property as collateral, members have the right to full disclosure. Bylaws, Article 4, Section 2. The room went quiet. Somewhere near the back, someone muttered, "He's right." Karen glanced toward Diane, who gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. "Fine," Karen said, voice crisp. "We're borrowing $1.2 million from First National Bank for comprehensive upgrades to the facility. The application is under review." "And what's the status of that review?" Dad asked. Her jaw tightened. "There have been some unexpected requests for additional documentation. It's just red tape, nothing concerning." Dad nodded slowly. "While we're discussing finances, I have a question about fine collection. The quarterly statement shows $3 million in fines reported, but based on conversations in this room tonight, I suspect the total collected is much higher." A stir ran through the crowd. Mr. Jackson raised his hand. "I paid my fine 8 weeks ago. It's not in the statement." "Same here," Mrs. Garcia called out. Karen's pen tapped faster. "Those recent fines haven't been processed yet." Dad's voice stayed even. "Interesting. Because bank records require accurate and timely reporting of income, especially when applying for a loan of this size." The murmurs swelled. Someone near the back said, "So, where's the money going?" Karen banged her gavel. "This meeting is adjourned." But people didn't leave. They kept talking, comparing notes, holding up their own citations like they were comparing scars. The noise built until Karen stood and stalked toward the hallway. I slipped out behind Dad and Mom, catching up just in time to hear Karen's voice, low and sharp. "I don't know what game you're playing, Reynolds, but you're making a powerful enemy." Dad met her gaze without blinking. "I'm not playing games. I'm ensuring our community follows its own rules. All of them. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. We walked out into the cool night air, the hum of voices still spilling from the building. Behind us, more neighbors joined the sidewalk, like we were all part of the same parade. Mrs. Wilson caught up to Dad. "What happens next?" she asked. He glanced down the street toward our house. "The bank's audit results should be back within 2 weeks. If there are discrepancies..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I thought about Karen's face when Dad quoted the bylaws at her, the quick flash of something like panic. She had no idea how close she was standing to the edge, and I had a feeling Dad was about to give her a push. The morning after the HOA meeting, our front lawn looked like a crime scene. The gnome, Emily's crooked-smiled garden gnome, was smashed to pieces by the hydrangeas, blue hat shattered, white dust scattered in the mulch like bone fragments. The mailbox door hung open, and inside, our mail was gone. Mom stood on the porch in her robe, arms crossed tight. "This isn't random." Dad didn't say anything. He took out his phone and snapped photos, wide shots, close-ups, every angle, before calling the police non-emergency line. While we waited, Mr. Jackson walked over, holding his coffee. "You see your Facebook this morning?" I pulled out my phone. Karen had posted in the neighborhood group again, this time attaching blurry photos of our driveway from the graduation night. The caption read, "Some residents believe the rules don't apply to them. Excessive parking, noisy parties, and lawn neglect hurt property values for everyone." The comments were a mixed bag, some people cheering her on, others defending us, but the damage was there for everyone to see. The police officer arrived, took the report, and left with a shrug. "No cameras? Hard to prove who did it." Dad didn't argue. He just went into his office and came back 15 minutes later with a small cardboard box. "Time to install cameras," he said. By noon, we had 2 motion-activated cameras mounted, one facing the driveway, one covering the front door. A third went in the backyard, all connected to Dad's laptop and phone. It didn't take long for them to pay off. That same night, just after midnight, the driveway camera caught 2 figures in hoodies walking slowly past our house. One carried a can. Later we'd find the smell of spray paint on our side fence. The words were jagged, crude, HOA trash. Dad sent the footage to the police and printed stills for his file. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rant, but I noticed he'd stopped shaving every day, like he'd decided other things mattered more than looking the part of the calm banker. 2 days later, we got a letter from the county code enforcement office. Anonymous complaints had been filed against our home. Excessive noise, improper waste disposal, hazardous materials in garage. Mom read the list aloud, then dropped the paper on the counter. "They're trying to bury us in bureaucracy." That afternoon, Dad found a notice taped to our door from animal control. Another anonymous complaint, this one claiming our dog, Max, was aggressive and had threatened a neighbor. Max, who barely barked at squirrels. Emily sat on the couch with her arms wrapped around Max's neck. "Can they take him?" she asked. "Not without proof," Dad said. His voice was steady, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tightening. The intimidation didn't stop there. On Friday, someone dumped a bag of trash across our driveway. Old food, coffee grounds, and a pair of broken flip-flops. That night, as I was closing my bedroom window, I saw Karen standing at the end of her driveway, phone in hand, aimed straight at our house. She didn't wave, she just kept filming until I pulled the blinds. The next morning, Mrs. Garcia came over with a flash drive. "You might want this," she said. "Security cam from my porch." On it, clear as daylight, was Diane, Karen's shadow, spray painting our fence. Karen stood a few feet away, keeping watch. Mom covered her mouth. "We take this to the police." Dad shook his head. "Not yet. We hold it. The more they do, the bigger the case." I was starting to understand his patience. He wasn't just gathering proof. He was building something airtight, something that would hold up in front of more than just our neighbors. That night, our little coalition met in Dr. Patel's garage. We shared photos, videos, dates, and times. The list of incidents had grown from petty to personal to criminal. "She's not going to stop," Mrs. Wilson said. "No," Dad agreed. "But every step she takes now is another step into her own trap." As we walked home under the streetlights, I caught sight of Karen's silhouette in her upstairs window. She was watching, I was sure of it, and for the first time, I didn't feel dread. I felt something closer to anticipation. Because Karen didn't know the audit results from the bank were only days away, and when they landed, she'd have more to worry about than our driveway. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Dad read it once, then again, his expression unreadable. He closed the laptop slowly, like he was giving the news time to settle. "It's done," he said. Mom looked up from her coffee. "The audit?" He nodded. "They found discrepancies, big ones." "How big?" I asked. "Close to $60,000 in unreported income over the last 2 quarters, mostly from fines." The room went quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. I knew 60,000 was a lot, but the way Dad said it, calm, clipped, told me it was more than just a number. It was leverage. "They'll need explanations, receipts, proof of where that money went," Dad continued. "And if they can't provide them, the bank freezes the application, possibly denies it outright." Mom set her mug down. "And you're the one who delivers the news?" He shook his head. "Not directly. The bank's compliance department will send the official notice, but Karen will know where it started." That night, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. It wasn't public, but by the time the lights flicked off in the community center, word had already leaked out. Mr. Jackson texted. Karen's furious, pacing like a cat in a cage. The next morning, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address, just "to the residents," typed neatly across the front. Inside was a 1-page letter from the HOA board claiming a clerical error had delayed the recording of certain fine revenues, and that the matter was being resolved internally. Dad read it and raised an eyebrow. Damage control. But the real hit came that evening, when the bank's official notice arrived, copied to all board members. The language was formal but brutal. "The review has identified significant discrepancies between reported income and documented deposits. Please provide full financial reconciliation, including receipts and bank statements, within 10 business days. Failure to comply will result in denial of the loan application." We didn't have to wait long for Karen's reaction. At 7:42 p.m., she was on the neighborhood Facebook group, posting a long statement about malicious interference and individuals spreading false accusations to sabotage community progress. She didn't name Dad, but the implication was clear enough for anyone paying attention. Within minutes, the comments exploded, half the neighborhood demanding transparency, the other half parroting Karen's line about outsiders trying to ruin things. Our coalition stayed quiet. Every time Dad's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Jackson or Mrs. Garcia, it was just one word: patience. The pressure started to show on Karen. I saw her the next day, standing in her driveway with Diane, phone to her ear, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Diane kept glancing toward our house, then looking away. 2 nights later, Mrs. Smith called. "You should come by. I think you'll want to see this." Her front window had a clear view of the HOA office. Through the glass, we watched Karen hunched over a desk with stacks of papers around her. She kept rifling through binders, pulling out pages, flipping to others, then tossing them aside. "She's scrambling," Mrs. Smith said. Back home, Dad opened his laptop. "They have 10 days. If they can't account for that money, the loan dies. And if the loan dies, so does her big renovation project, and probably her grip on this neighborhood." I leaned against the doorframe. "You think she'll go down without swinging?" Dad gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She's already swinging. She just hasn't realized she's hitting air." That night, as I was shutting off the lights, I saw a single car parked across the street. Engine off, no lights, just sitting there, a silhouette in the driver's seat. Karen's world was starting to close in, and I had the uneasy feeling she was about to make one last, desperate move to claw her way out. It started with the sirens. Saturday morning, just after sunrise, 2 police cruisers rolled to a stop in front of our house, lights flashing. No sirens now, just that quiet, ominous strobe through the curtains. Mom was still in her robe, coffee in hand. "What on earth?" There was a knock, heavy and deliberate. Dad opened the door to find an officer holding a clipboard. "We received a report of a domestic disturbance at this address." Dad blinked. "There's no disturbance here." The officer scanned the living room behind him. The caller stated there was shouting, breaking glass, and a possible assault. Mom stepped forward. That's absurd. We were eating breakfast. The officers took a quick look around, apologized, and left, but not before we noticed Karen standing across the street in her robe, phone in hand, watching every second. She's escalating, Dad said as the cruisers pulled away. By noon, the county code enforcement truck was parked outside. Another anonymous complaint, this time about hazardous chemicals stored in the garage. The inspector looked embarrassed as Dad walked him through the spotless shelves of labeled paint cans and gardening supplies. Sorry, the inspector said. We have to respond to every report. 2 hours later, animal control knocked again. Someone had reported Max roaming aggressively in the neighborhood. Max, who was asleep in the living room the whole time. It was a blitz, one call after another, each one designed to create a paper trail of trouble at our address. But Karen didn't stop at the authorities. That evening, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up with her latest post. Some residents are under investigation for repeated violations and public safety concerns. As your HOA president, I will not be intimidated into ignoring threats to our community. She still didn't name us, but she didn't need to. The implication was like a stain that spread on its own. The comments were uglier this time. Words like dangerous and unstable popped up, mixed in with a few brave defenders pushing back. Mrs. Garcia texted, "Ignore it. We've got the proof." Dad stayed calm, but I could see the toll in the way he rubbed the back of his neck, the longer pauses before he spoke. When people run out of logic, they reach for noise, he said. 2 nights later, we caught her in the act. Almost. The backyard camera pinged an alert at 11:46 p.m. A figure in dark clothes crept along the fence line, pausing by the corner near the gate. A metallic click, then the sound of something being poured. When Dad reviewed the footage, his jaw set hard. "Gasoline," he said. "She's trying to set us up for a fire violation, or worse." We called the police. This time, the officers took it seriously, especially when Dad handed them the flash drive with the footage. They dusted the gate latch for prints, bagged the gas can she'd left behind, and promised to follow up. The next morning, Karen posted again, this time a cryptic message. "Some people will regret crossing me. Truth has a way of coming out." But something in her tone was different. The sharp edge was still there, but it was wrapped in something else. Panic. That evening, the coalition met at Mr. Jackson's. Everyone had stories from the past week, mysterious calls, drive-by photos, even notes left on doors. "She's throwing everything she's got," Mrs. Wilson said. "Like she knows the end is near." Dad leaned forward. "That's exactly what's happening, and every one of these stunts just strengthens the case. Between the audit, the vandalism footage, and the harassment reports, she's boxed herself in." I thought about the silhouette in the parked car, the gasoline can, the constant stream of accusations. Karen wasn't just fighting to win anymore. She was fighting not to lose everything. And in that moment, I realized something. She already had. She just didn't know it yet. The flyer showed up in every mailbox 2 days before the meeting. Special HOA session, financial update and community concerns. No agenda, no explanation, but the timing told us everything. When we arrived at the community center, the parking lot was already packed. People milled in small knots outside the doors, voices low but charged. Inside, every folding chair was filled, and more people stood along the walls. Even the air felt heavy. Karen sat at the head table, her scarf perfectly knotted, smile tight. Diane sat beside her, phone at the ready. The other board members looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Dad took his usual seat in the middle row. Mom sat next to him, legal pad on her lap. I leaned against the wall in the back, next to Mr. Jackson and Mrs. Garcia. Karen tapped the mic. "Thank you for coming. I know there have been rumors circulating. I want to take this opportunity to set the record straight." She launched into a polished speech about temporary accounting delays, malicious interference, and a small group of residents spreading falsehoods. Her tone was smooth, but her eyes kept flicking toward Dad like she was waiting for him to make a move. When she finished, she smiled. "Questions?" Dad stood. "Yes, I have a few." A ripple went through the crowd. "First," Dad said, Why does the bank's audit show $59,842 in fine revenue unaccounted for in your official statements? Karen's smile froze. As I've explained, those funds are pending deposit. Pending for 2 quarters? Dad's voice was calm, but the question hung in the air like a hammer. Someone in the back muttered, "Yeah, right." Karen straightened. "We've been dealing with administrative turnover." Dad nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you can explain this." He held up a manila folder and began pulling out enlarged color prints. HOA statements, bank deposit records, side by side. "These are your quarterly reports. And these are the bank's records. The totals don't match, not even close." Gasps spread through the room. Karen opened her mouth, but Dad kept going. "Here's another set. Copies of violation notices from residents here tonight, totaling over $12,000. Not one of them appears in your ledger." Mrs. Garcia stood. "Mine's in there. April 14th, $200 for a hedge 2 inches too high." Mr. Jackson's voice boomed from the back. "Mine too. Basketball hoop violation. $50. Paid in cash." The noise in the room grew until Karen banged the gavel. "Order! These documents are private property." "No," Mom cut in from her seat. "They belong to the HOA, which means they belong to the members. That's all of us." Diane was whispering furiously into Karen's ear now, but Karen's face had gone pale. Dad set the last sheet on the table in front of her. "And this," he said, "is footage from a neighbor's security camera. It shows your vice president vandalizing my property while you stand watch. I've already provided it to the police." The room erupted. Shouts, questions, phones snapping photos. Karen's hand shook as she reached for her water glass. A man in the front row stood. "I move for a vote of no confidence in this board." "I second," Mrs. Wilson said, her voice steady. Karen's gavel cracked down. "This meeting is over." "No," Mr. Jackson cut her off. "According to the bylaws, Article 6, Section 3, a motion from the floor with a second requires a vote if a quorum is present. And from the looks of it," he swept a hand toward the packed room, "we've got one." People started raising their hands, first in small clusters, then in waves. "All in favor of removing the current board?" Mr. Jackson called out. Hands shot up across the room. Only a handful stayed down, mostly in the front row. Karen's lips moved, but no sound came out. Diane stared at the table. Dad stood, gathering his papers. "The vote is clear." The applause started in the back and rolled forward until the whole room was clapping. Karen sat frozen in her chair, the gavel still in her hand, but the sound swallowed her whole. As we filed out into the cool night air, Mrs. Garcia caught my arm. "You just watched history," she said. "She's done." I glanced back through the glass doors. Karen was still at the head table, staring at the stack of papers Dad had left in front of her. For the first time since the pink slip, I felt like the air in my chest had room to move. The morning after the showdown, the neighborhood was quiet. Not the usual weekend quiet of lawnmowers and kids on bikes, but a heavy, listening kind of quiet. Karen's porch light was off. Her blinds were drawn, no scarf-clad figure pacing the driveway with a phone in hand. It was almost unsettling, like the absence of noise had its own weight. At breakfast, Dad scrolled through his email. "The bank's already pulled the loan application," he said, "cited financial irregularities and pending investigation." Mom looked up from her coffee. That was fast. They were waiting for last night. Once the board lost authority, they didn't have to pretend anymore. By noon, word had spread. Mr. Jackson stopped by, still grinning from ear to ear. "County Sheriff's Office picked up the vandalism complaint this morning. They've got Diane on video, Karen in the frame. It's not just HOA business anymore." Mrs. Wilson called an hour later. "Code enforcement's closing all the complaints filed against you. No violations found. They said they've been getting a lot of questionable reports from the same source." It felt like dominoes tipping over one by one. Every petty strike Karen had made was now swinging back toward her, but there was still the matter of the missing money. 2 days later, envelopes started appearing in mailboxes. Official letterhead. Notice of special audit. HOA financial records. The county had ordered a full forensic audit, going back 3 years. Every resident would have access to the results. Mrs. Garcia came over, holding her letter like it was a winning lottery ticket. "She's cooked," she said. Meanwhile, the HOA office was locked. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Closed pending reorganization." The online neighborhood group went strangely quiet. A few loyalists posted half-hearted messages about due process and innocent until proven guilty, but most threads were about block parties, lost cats, and yard sale announcements. It was as if the whole street had exhaled at once. That Friday, we had our first coalition meeting without the shadow of Karen hanging over us. Dr. Patel brought pizza. Mrs. Wilson made brownies. People laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Dad stood and raised a slice. "This isn't over yet. The audit will take time. But for now, we've got our neighborhood back." It wasn't just talk. Within a week, the board, now led temporarily by Mr. Jackson, voted to suspend all fine collections until the audit was complete. They also reinstated several revoked approvals, including Mrs. Wilson's bird feeders and the Garcias' marigolds. Small things, maybe, but they felt like cracks of sunlight after a long winter. Still, Karen hadn't left. I saw her once, stepping out to grab her mail. No scarf, no makeup. She glanced around like she was checking for an ambush, then disappeared inside. "Losing power is one thing," Dad said when I told him. "Losing the story you've been telling about yourself, that's harder." The following Monday, the county investigator came by to interview Dad and Mom. They took copies of everything: violation notices, photos, camera footage, even Karen's Facebook posts. When they left, Dad closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. "That was the last piece," he said. "The last piece of what?" I asked. "The wall," he said. "It's built now. All we have to do is watch it close in." That night, the cameras picked up a moving truck 2 streets over, not ours, but seeing it there, idling in the glow of a street lamp. I couldn't help wondering how soon it would be parked in front of Karen's house. For the first time since this all began, I believed it wasn't a matter of if, only when. It came on a Wednesday afternoon, almost 3 months after the showdown. The sky was the color of cold steel, and the air smelled like rain. I was on the porch with Max when 2 unmarked sedans rolled up in front of Karen's house. 4 people stepped out, 3 in plain clothes, 1 in a county sheriff's jacket. No hurry, no hesitation. They walked straight up her driveway and knocked. The door opened a crack, then wider. Karen stood there in a faded sweatshirt, hair pulled back. One of the plainclothes officers spoke quietly, then handed her a folder. She flipped it open, her lips moving as she read. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the moment she understood. Her shoulders sagged. She nodded. Then she stepped aside, and they all went inside. Across the street, curtains twitched in every window. 20 minutes later, they walked her out. Not in handcuffs, yet, but with that slow, deliberate escort that says this isn't a conversation anymore. Diane trailed behind, pale and tight-lipped, carrying a cardboard box. The cars pulled away and the street erupted. Neighbors came out in clusters, voices overlapping. "What happened?" "They got her for the money." "I heard there's vandalism charges too." Dad came up beside me, phone in hand. "County just released a statement. Audit found $122,000 in misappropriated funds over 3 years. Fines, special assessments, even landscaping fees, all unaccounted for, plus criminal mischief, harassment, and filing false reports." Mom joined us on the porch. "And the renovation loan?" "Dead," Dad said simply. "Banks closing their file." The official fallout was swift. The HOA board, what was left of it, issued a public apology and voted unanimously to permanently ban Karen and Diane from holding any position within the association. The county announced formal charges: embezzlement, vandalism, and harassment. Within a week, a for sale sign appeared in Karen's yard. She never came out to talk to anyone. Movers arrived early one morning, packed in silence, and by afternoon she was gone. Diane left the next day. The neighborhood felt different almost instantly. People waved more. Kids played in the cul-de-sacs without parents watching the clock for HOA patrols. Mrs. Wilson planted a second bird feeder. The Garcias marigolds bloomed bright and unbothered. One evening, Mr. Jackson hosted a community cookout in the park. Nearly everyone came, burgers sizzling, music playing low, people swapping stories about the bad old days like veterans after a war. At one point, Mrs. Garcia raised her glass toward Dad. "You saved us," she said. Dad shook his head. "We all did. You can't fight someone like Karen alone." Still, I knew it was his patience, his precision, that had made it work. He never lunged, just kept stacking bricks until the wall was too high for her to climb. As the sun dipped below the trees, I thought back to that first pink slip on the windshield. The shock, the anger, the sense of being trapped in someone else's rules. Now, the rules belonged to the community again. And Karen? She was just a chapter we'd closed for good. That night, I asked Dad if he felt satisfied. He thought for a long moment. "It's not about satisfaction," he said finally. "It's about making sure the next person who thinks about pulling a stunt like that knows it won't work here." By the time summer rolled around, the neighborhood didn't just look different. It felt different. You could hear it in the sound of kids laughing at the park without anyone shooing them away. You could see it in the way neighbors lingered at the mailbox, actually talking to each other instead of glancing over their shoulders. Even Max seemed lighter, tail wagging as he trotted down the street on evening walks. The HOA had a new board now, led by Mr. Jackson. They called it the Willow Court Agreement, a promise to the community that rules would be fair, transparent, and used to protect, not punish. Fines would require documented violations and unanimous board approval. And the budget? Posted online every quarter for everyone to see. One Saturday, Dad and I were repairing the front gate, not because we'd been told to, but because it needed it. Mrs. Garcia strolled by with her terrier. "Looks good," she said. "You know, the way things are now, feels like home again." Dad smiled. "That's the point. Karen's old house stayed empty for a while. People said it had been repossessed to cover her legal fees and restitution. Eventually, a young couple bought it. They planted sunflowers in the front yard, the first thing to bloom there in years. I found myself driving past it one evening, windows down, warm breeze carrying the smell of barbecue from somewhere nearby. And I realized the house wasn't hers anymore, not in memory, not in spirit. It belonged to the street again. We never saw Karen after she left. No postcards, no gossip about where she'd gone. She became a story, a cautionary tale you told new residents over coffee. Once we had a president who thought the HOA was her kingdom. Then, the kingdom pushed back. Every now and then, I'd catch Dad looking at the driveway, the one we were once banned from using. His gaze would linger for just a second before he'd turn away. Not bitter, not triumphant, just thoughtful. One night I asked him, "Do you ever wish you'd just ignored it, paid the fine, moved on?" He set down his book. "If you let people take the small things, they'll come for the big ones. It's not about driveways or garden gnomes. It's about knowing when to draw the line and having the patience to hold it." That patience had changed more than just our family's life. It had rebuilt the way our little community worked. People stood up for each other now. When a rule didn't make sense, they talked about it. When someone needed help, they gave it. It wasn't perfect. No neighborhood is. But it was ours. And that made all the difference. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think about that first pink slip flapping under the wiper. How small it seemed then. How big it became. And how, in the end, it wasn't about revenge at all. It was about taking something broken and making it whole again.